I want to talk about nutrition. I've been getting a lot of questions about nutrition, probably because I've been talking a lot about food mood lately. And I gave a free class last Friday on food mood anxiety solutions. And so I like to talk about nutrition and mental health and food and mood. And so maybe that's why I've been getting some questions about it. And there were some things that I didn't share in the class that I felt like I wanted to share. But in preparing to teach the class, I realized I had a lot more to share than we could possibly do in a 45-minute class. So I ended up creating a course. So I actually have food, mood, anxiety solutions course that is coming out this week. Actually, it'll be out by the time you hear this podcast. It will have just fresh, hot off the presses out. And I have a little bit of a different take than most people have, I think, on food and mood and nutrition. So most nutritional therapists, we get great training. I love the way that we're trained, but my take on it is a little bit different because of my path, obviously. But I also look through the lens, a trauma-informed lens from my background as a clinical mental health counselor and all of my trauma training. So I look through a trauma lens, but now I, of course, look through a quantum health lens. So I have some ideas about nutrition. Even when I first started, they're different than when I first started. And I have a very personal interest in this because I struggled with moodiness, which I just called blood sugar regulation issues. And they are blood sugar regulation issues. That's what happens for people. And I managed that with protein, by eating protein regularly, and I could manage. But I always felt like I was just managing and not really ever getting to the root of that. But when you live with something for so long, you just start to feel like it's just part of who you are. And my anxiousness, you know, I'm I've always been kind of that type A. So people say that, but I'm actually very chill. Practitioners that have worked with me are like, well, you're kind of the type A personality and you're very ambitious. And that's true. I like to do things well. But the kind of anxiousness where you're just always feeling a little, I can't even really describe it, but I always felt a little depleted. Like I needed to be like, I needed to be plugged in and juiced up. And even though it was coming out as this kind of anxious or feeling anxious internally, I actually felt like I was drained. Sometimes I would say, like, it feels like all of my essential body fluids have just like left my body and I'm just feeling super drained, but yet feeling anxious. And I didn't realize how anxious I was until I started studying applied quantum biology and started putting all the pieces together and realizing that even though I had this really healthy lifestyle of non-drinker, non-smoker, I ate whole foods diet, really healthy, exercised regularly, went to therapy regularly, have done all different kinds of therapeutic modalities and body work and energy work. I've done all the things and it was all helpful. I think all along. I talk about this on the podcast a lot, but it was never really feeling like I felt like I was always chasing, like I was managing, but yet chasing something that I couldn't quite figure out. And now I don't feel that way as much. I feel more centered. I feel more myself, like I'm returning to the home that is me, an inside home kind of feeling. And so that's why this is really personal to me, is because I think a lot of us deal with mood swings and irritability and anxiousness or depression and what we might label all of the things related to mood. And we're just either managing, we maybe have found some things that help, but aren't really getting at the core. And so that's why I like to talk about it, and that's why I have probably a little different approach than most people. So, if you don't know, if you're new here, or maybe I haven't really laid this out in another episode, my background in clinical mental health counseling, I was always really interested in human potential, right? And wellness and wholeness, and never really gravitated to the medical model. But along the way, I figured out that obviously trauma was really important. So I did a lot of trauma training. And then after my father was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, I got really interested in gut health. And you may have heard me talk about that story, so I won't go into it. But and then I started realizing the gut brain axis and how most of our neurotransmitters are made in the gut, not the brain. And so I was like, it's almost unethical to not teach graduate students that are going into counseling to work in mental health, whether that's social workers or licensed professional counselors or psychologists and even psychiatrists, like, it seems unethical to not know anything about gut health and where make our neurotransmitters, and yet that really isn't covered in our education. I created a course, Wellness and Resilience in Counseling, elective course, but it was an elective, and so that's something that I thought really needs to be included, and I thought I found the answers there. And it is helpful. I think understanding that your mood is greatly affected by the food that you're eating, but also your lifestyle. That can be very liberating. It's very empowering because that we can do something about that. So after I got interested in gut health, I went back to school to become a functional nutritional therapist and then did extensive training in mental health nutrition and did some training with Dr. Georgia Ede, who is a nutritional psychiatrist, who I think is lovely. She just came out with a new book. She's just a wonderful human being. I absolutely loved training with her, but I loved just being around her and listening to her. So I did all this really extensive training in mental health nutrition, but still, and Dr. Ede and I have a very similar approach, but for the most part, I just sort of put all of this stuff together based on my own experience in my own life and then trying things out with different clients and what was working and what wasn't working. And I put together what I ended up calling a pro healing diet. And I know there's some bad connotation to the word diet, but it's really more like a pro healing nutrition plan. And clients would go on that plan for it's just a way of eating that's very focused on gut health, but it is also incorporates supporting our circadian rhythms and also mitochondrial health. So it's a seasonal, local, ancestral, animal-based approach to eating and healing so that and people would do that sometimes people would do that for a month or 6 weeks and then start feeling a lot better. Some people stay on it long term. Some people commit to 3 months because that's what I generally recommend is 90 days. But it's also a lot of trial and error. So this is kind of my beef with practitioners that I've worked with and that I see that are very popular on the internet, and they're very popular, like, on Instagram and social media, but they haven't figured out the mitochondrial health piece and the circadian rhythms part of it. And they push like this one way for everybody. And yeah, whole foods, okay, but it's still about trial and error. And it really irritates me when practitioners are not trauma informed and when they have zero understanding of addiction, particularly food addiction, and act like food addiction isn't even really a thing. There are some practitioners that don't believe that that's a thing. I live it, so I you can't tell me it's not a thing. I am very open to a conversation about what that actually means and in terms of healing, when we are healing our gut and we're helping our mitochondrial health and we're doing the psychosocial, emotional, and spiritual work because of course there is always an emotional component to our physical symptoms. So yeah, I want to address all of that in a really holistic way. But to say that, you know, food addiction isn't a real thing is gets me really riled up. But I am willing to have a conversation about what that really is, and is that something that we can reverse or overcome through a lot of healing? And I'm open to I'm hope so. That's what I'm working on is healing so that I can add more and more things back into my life that I love. But I'm also aware I've come to a place in my own healing journey. And it does bring up sadness for me, but I have come to a place where I enjoy feeling good. I enjoy feeling grounded and clear-headed and energized and really stable mood. I enjoy that so much that if there are certain things that I have to avoid or abstain from because they interfere with that, then I'm okay with that. Even if that means the rest of my life I have to abstain from some things, I'm okay with that. But my point is that you really we need to become our own health gurus because all of these other people that are saying that we need to do it this way and we have to do it that way and you have to have carbs and you can't have carbs and you should and you shouldn't and you do it really can get confusing. And when we have a way of anything, of healing, of eating, of our lifestyle choices, whatever we do that has worked for us, we want to share it with other people, which I love that. Think that's great. That's what I'm doing too. Can't knock that. But to say that that's the way every single person needs to do it, it's just, well, it's not true. And it doesn't even make sense to say that. So, a lot of food mood and nutrition for your own mental health, for your health in general, but when we're talking about mental health, is trial and error. So, yes, I studied extensively ketogenic diets for mental health can be very helpful. Nutritional ketosis, remember, ketosis is a metabolic state. We can use nutritional ketosis and change our diet. My goal is for my clients to become metabolically flexible, where they can use glucose and ketones for fuel. So using fat for fuel as well as glucose. But a lot of people, a lot of us, myself included, when we have trauma in our backgrounds, we have a lot of cellular danger signaling, a lot of inflammation in our bodies, then we tend to be glucose burners. So we tend to, and it's not, people always say, but I don't eat sugar. It's not really about that. Your body has just gotten very used to utilizing carbohydrates because all carbohydrates break down to glucose. So it's not necessarily sugar. It's just that your body's gotten very used to using the carbohydrates, and we can even crave the carbohydrates because we want the quick energy. And so sometimes people get confused and say, but then don't we need it? No, actually, that's not. It's better, in my opinion, it's better to be metabolically flexible and be able to utilize ketones and glucose. But even more importantly, in the healing phase, is that we have to help the body move out of that cellular danger response, cellular danger signaling that's going on. But it's more than just the food that helps with the safety signaling. It's about supporting your circadian rhythms. It's about helping your mitochondria and healing your body, mind, body, soul, so that you're able to move through life with a stable mood, with balanced hormones, where you're actually making the neurotransmitters, but also releasing things when they need to be released. It's not just about being able to make them. But in terms of food and mood, I always say that mood follows food. To pay attention to your mood after you've had meals, sometimes pretty quickly, but usually within about 30 minutes or so, you can track your digestion, your energy, and your mood, and just see. I don't say that tracking to make yourself, more stressed about it because that's not helpful. Stressing about your food is the wrong direction. That's not what we're trying to do. We're actually trying to have more safety signaling. So, but you can start to see even subtly when you become more irritable or you find yourself worrying more, overthinking, or a little more anxious, or a little more drained, what you might call depressed mood, or you might actually experience depression. But even if you're not, in a depressive episode where you're really feeling depressed, you can start to feel low energy, low mood, or you're doing the anxiety depression roller coaster thing where you're, feeling super anxious and then it's almost like your body gets completely worn out. And so now you're just depressed. But it can also have to do with drive and focus. All of those things can be helped or supported by our nutrition or hurt. Like when we're eating things that and drinking things that aren't supportive of our body. And this is individualized. So it really depends on your body. But there are certain things that I have found that have been extremely helpful for clients. And so, even though it's trial and error and you have to see in yourself, I like to share these things. So, this is some of what I shared in the class that I taught on Friday. And this is also in the course. I go really deep in the course in terms of like which foods and all the things and timing of eating and all of that. And I won't go into that here. I just kind of want to stay high level. But I do want to share some of the things that have been the most helpful. Because what was really surprising to me is that I was already eating really well. I was eating whole foods. And I never in a million years would have guessed that plant foods were actually part of the problem. So, the thing that gets pushed on us so much about eat your fruits and vegetables. We all know fruits and vegetables are great for us actually was causing a lot of problems for me. And that's mainly because I was eating things out of season because they were healthy foods, two finger healthy foods, superfoods, and things like spinach and almonds. And I was doing a lot of nuts. I was doing, and I was kind of, I never had to force myself to eat the spinach, but I mean, I was really like loading up on what I thought was the healthier foods and making myself eat lots of fruits and vegetables. Not a ton of fruit, actually, but a lot of vegetables because I did realize with my issues that fruit was causing more cravings for more sugar. And also, I just didn't feel quite right when I would eat a lot of fruit. But I was eating things out of season and I was overloading on certain plant foods, especially like nuts. So a lot of people will go deep into the almond milk, almond flour, eating on the almonds, eating the nuts. Those are the babies of the plant. And so they are heavily defended, meaning that the plant doesn't really want you to eat their babies. And so there are a lot of anti-nutrients or defense chemicals in those in those nuts. And there are defense chemicals in plants, some more than others. The fruit is generally the part of the plant that it wants you to eat it and spread its seed. So there are less anti-nutrients or these defense chemicals in the fruit, but when you're eating fruit that's grown nowhere near you, it's a different because food is light, and that light is information. So when the light environment, if your food is grown in a different light environment than you're in, and you're not even outside, so you've got all of this mismatched signaling going on. That's going to increase the cellular danger response. So I was not aware of that. I did not know that. I didn't know about oxalates and phytic acid. I knew a little bit about lectins and lectins not being great because of thyroid health and understanding. I had a little bit of an understanding about that. So I really went deep into all of this information and started learning more about eating seasonally, eating local foods, really backing off of some of these things that I thought were superfoods. And I ate a lot of sweet potatoes, very high in oxalates. I love them. I don't, I'm not saying that you have to give up all these things. I just want you to start. And I don't actually want you to go cold turkey giving up all these things. I want you to go slowly because that can be a whole nother separate issue. But just to start to pay attention to the foods that you're eating, we know that if we eat junk food, if we're eating things out of packages, even if, pastas and things that you're making homemade food, but you're still opening packages to make that food, what is the information? What light code information is being held in that food? How is that helpful to your body? And when we're talking about mental health, I'm talking mostly about protein and healthy fats because what builds neurotransmitters, the precursors to the neurotransmitters, amino acids. That's how we build our neurotransmitters, which are important for mood and mental health and a lot of other functions. But if you don't have the raw materials to make those neurotransmitters, then you're not, yeah, that's a problem, right? And then our hormones are made from fat. So if we're all super low fat and we don't have enough fat for even for healing. So fat is really important for many reasons in the body. For the cell membrane is made out of fat, our hormones, vitamin D, which I would argue is a master hormone, but all of those are fat soluble vitamins, A, D, E, and K. All of that is really important. So that's why I do focus a lot on complete sources of protein, amino acids, and then healthy fats. And most of my clients are deficient in those two things. They're not eating enough of that. And they are confused about the other stuff and which carbs to eat and which not, because we get so much confusing information about that. And so we just dial in on the nutrient deficiencies. But here's the thing, even if you're eating really great, healthy food, if you can't digest that food, you're not going to be absorbing the nutrients. So it's not so much what we all heard growing up, you are what you eat. It's more like you are what you absorb. And so if you have poor digestion, which people with mental health, where we see mental health issues, mental health concerns, a lot of anxiety, depression, bipolar, these kinds of things, we also tend to see digestive health issues, gut health issues. And we know that what we call leaky gut, which is intestinal permeability, where the lining of the gut thins, that can cause all kinds of different problems, sinus problems, allergies, but a lot of mental health concerns too. So that's why I was like, well, that's it. We have to help people with the gut. We heal the gut, you heal the gut lining, because we are designed to make a new gut lining every 2 to 5 days. But what I did not realize is that gut health, and particularly leaky gut, is actually a circadian rhythms issue. So we might be going at it with the food and trying to do all these healing foods, which, first of all, a lot of the healing foods for the gut that we're told are really healing, like the probiotic and the prebiotic foods, and bone broth and fermented foods like kimchi or sauerkraut, those are all very high histamine foods. And so if you're already having a lot of reactions and you're extremely sensitive, which most people that have a lot of anxiety and mood swing, we tend to be very sensitive types too. So then it just exacerbates the problem. And then we start having histamine reactions. And then it ends up looking like you're allergic to almost everything you put in your mouth and you don't know what to do. So if you're getting like a runny nose, time you eat, you get kind of a runny nose, or you start to feel digestively, you just don't feel very good. You're bloated, you get headachy, moody, irritable, even kind of angry. Things that would normally just kind of roll off your back bother you a lot, or you find yourself just ruminating and overthinking and all of those things. That can all be related to leaky gut health, which is really more of a circadian rhythms issue, but it can also be related to the foods that you're eating. Because we are so sensitive and because there's such a mismatch in our circadian rhythms and we're a mismatch in our natural environment. We're not in our natural environment enough to get oriented, and our food is grown out of season, not local food. We're opening packages, we're eating things that are processed And I think most people know like highly processed stuff is not going to help you feel good mentally. But even when you're eating real foods and doing a lot of your own cooking and you know what's in that food, it can still be kind of tricky to figure that out, and which can be frustrating, right? But I think the way out of that to start just paying attention, noticing what seems to really work in your body, sticking to those things. I talk a lot about animal sources of food. So my pro healing diet is actually ancestral animal based because that's where I see the most healing. And that's because the animal sources of food are the most bioavailable nutrients, the easiest for the human body to absorb those nutrients. So even though there are nutrients in a lot of the plant foods, you're getting your vitamins and minerals if you can't absorb them. And it's tough for any human, not just people with digestive issues because of the anti-nutrients that are also in those plant foods that block some of our ability to absorb them. So I'm not trying to strip you of all your fruits and vegetables. I promise I'm not a dogmatic, like hardcore in any way because I do think this all of this is very nuanced. You have to find what works for you and become your own health guru. I just see a lot of healing when people will shift the way that they're eating, but we also have to do the things that are gonna support our circadian rhythms and our mitochondrial health. And I do think it's helpful. The food is a piece of helping our mitochondria. So that's helpful, but the nutrient deficiency that I see more than any other nutrient deficiency is sunlight. So many people, so many of us are natural light deficient. We live most of our lives indoors. And when we're outside, we are all covered up in our sunglasses and our sunscreens and all that. So I'm not telling you to stop doing all of that thing. I would tell you that, but then I get a lot of hate messages. What I do say is to start to build your solar callus so that you're out at sunrise and sunset. Now, I get a lot of pushback because when people struggle with their mental health and their sleep and they have a lot of insomnia, it's very difficult for people to get up and get that light first thing in the morning. I completely understand. I was a night owl too, and I was proud of being a night owl. So I get it that those of us that you don't get it till you get it, and then when you get it, you're like, "Okay, I just have to make myself get some natural light." As soon as you get up, wake up, get some natural light before screen light. If you're getting up in the dark, I mean, this is not new. I talk about this stuff all the time, but I don't think people are realizing how important it is for their mental health and their mood. So get if it's dark when you get up, don't flip all the lights on and go immediately to a screen. There are ways to mitigate that. Mitigate the blue light that would not be of it's not available outside yet. So blue light is available outside when it is daylight outside. But early morning, so sunrise and sunset, a lot of red and infrared, which is anti-inflammatory. Now, the blue light is there because the blue light is how our body tells time. So it's important for us to have some of that blue during the day. But then we're all on devices that have the sharp blue light, all of our indoor lighting that we have on. Some people say, well, I have incandescent bulbs. That's great because that does look more like sunset, but that's still going to have blue in there when there isn't any blue actually outside. So that's telling your body that it's daytime. So it's not only, we make melatonin actually in the day because melatonin is made from serotonin, and serotonin, we have that earlier in the day. So we're making the melatonin earlier in the day, but then the releasing of that melatonin is triggered by darkness. So if it's not dark until all of a sudden you're going to bed and you're turning out all the lights, then how is your then your body's releasing melatonin late, And melatonin does so much more than just help us sleep. So I know I cover that in my courses, so I won't go into it here. Plus, I'm really trying to stick to the nutrition parts of like, okay, what do I do? But I want you to start thinking about sunlight as a nutrient if you haven't already, and understand that the food that we eat is information. So, yes, it can be medicine. There are certain foods that just act like medicine in your body. And there are certain foods that your body is like, that is poison to me. There are certain things that are poisonous to all of us, like artificial sweeteners, artificial anything, artificial colors and sweeteners, and all of that. Those are neurotoxins. So, that's a problem, especially for mental health in general. But whole real food, it's more about trial and error and local and seasonal. Okay. But if you don't have the building blocks to make the neurotransmitters and the hormones, then you're not going to have optimal mental health. So you want to just start thinking about some of those things if that's helpful to you, because have the you can do whatever you want. I was going to say you have the right. You have the right to eat whatever you want. I'm all about food freedom and what feels really right for you. A few of the things just really quickly that I see over and over and over again for people that have struggle with mood is that caffeine is a drug. So if you're going to use caffeine, use it as such, as a drug. It's not a beverage. So, caffeine can be a real problem, especially in anxiousness and irritability and overwhelm, and that is not helping us. And sugar, so any of the processed sugar for sure, but then also even natural sugars can be a real problem for some of us, and you have to just kind of see. Gluten tends to be very irritating and inflammatory. I was gonna say there was a study done that where they were showing that gluten was inflammatory in all people, but some people seem to be able to tolerate it and some people don't. I know people are sort of sick to death of like gluten free and gluten free, but it does seem to be in my practice a problem. And it's not just about the pesticides because people will say, well, it's probably just the glyphosate and all the pesticides that are sprayed on everything. Well, that's in all of our food. Even there are some that say that's even in organic food at this point because it's in the soil. But even that, that's not how it feels in my body, and that's not intuitively. That's not what I think is going on. So even though I don't have all the answers and I'm not sure that it's just about inflammation, but when people have a lot of anxiety, gluten tends to be a problem for us. So you can play with that and do with that what you will. And then the other things, alcohol, alcohol's toxic. It's a toxin. So it definitely doesn't help with mood, even though it sort of seems like it is at first because it's helping people feel more relaxed, but actually it's causing more problems. So those are the big things that I see. And then the things that we play with in terms of gut health and mental health are dairy. Some people can do it, some people cannot. And soy, that we want to kind of be mindful of those things. And then everything else we just sort of see and see what's going to be right for the person when I'm working with people individually. Yeah, but that gives you an idea of kind of what I mean by food and mood and some of the tips that I have in terms of what you might want to consider if you are a person that is curious about food and mood. And you might find when you start kind of cleaning things up and really paying attention that food is impacting your mood more than you thought it was. So if you are interested in the food mood course, all of my courses, you can get 20% off because you are a listener of the podcast. So you can use the code podcast if you would like to take a course and get 20% off.